That song that you sang just before I got up to sing Peace was, I think, the third song that I wrote. It was back in 1964, I think. I had been at Yosemite, and I saw a couple of young men sitting on the railing of a bridge singing badly, and I was in the mood to sing. I had studied singing, and it was one of the things I did. And so they were very eager to have somebody sing for them rather than having to sing off-key themselves. So I sang, but I thought, well, I can't sing an Indian bhajan, I can't sing one of Master's chants, I can't sing the classical songs I was trained to sing. What can I sing? And I couldn't sing things like, I've drunk last night, drunk the night before. So I settled on Swing Low, Sweet Chariot. And that's a beautiful song, and it's somewhat spiritual. And they said, oh, you've got to come and sing for us this evening. And so there was a party that they were having, and I came and I sang Swing Low, Sweet Chariot. That was my repertoire. The next day, I was to leave Yosemite, and as I was driving in the car, I thought this would be a wonderful way to serve Master. You know, I had been thrown out on my ear by SRF, and it was a very hard period of my life because I didn't know what I could do. They told me, never tell anyone you're Master's disciple. We don't want people to know that he had such a despicable disciple as you. This is the kind of farewell I was given when they threw me out. It was too bad because I had only been trying to serve my Guru in the way he had told me to, but it wasn't going down with them. It turned out to be the best thing that ever happened to me, so I'm not grieving over it at all. But what I was trying to do at that time was find ways in which I could serve Master that would not conflict with anything that they were doing. And so, as I was driving home, the thought occurred to me that singing would be a wonderful way of serving him, but what can I sing that means anything? Even the classical music that I had been trained to sing was, well, you take the Italian song, O cessate di piagarmi, o lasciatemi morir. If you translate it into modern English, all it really means is stop bugging me and let me die. What kind of a message is that? I couldn't think of anything that anybody had written that I really wanted to sing. I wanted to sing Master's message. And the thought occurred to me, maybe I could write songs that would express his message. As soon as I had that thought, a song came to my mind. And I stopped at a milkshake stand, and on the paper napkin I wrote the words and the melody. And I knew how to write music as I'd studied piano and so on. And then I started writing songs, and This Why was the third song that I wrote. It really expresses what I have asked all my life. It's really a song, it's autobiographical, that song. I've always, from a child, wondered, why this, why that? And when I reached the teenage years, I began to think, at 13, I thought of becoming an astronomer. And I thought, well, that's not going to give me real understanding. I may know how large the universe is, I may know all sorts of things, but I won't know what will give me the inspiration that I want. Then I thought I'd find it through politics, through music, through art, through literature. I wanted to become a playwright. I reached the point where I understood that what I wanted in writing plays and so on, poetry, was to share truth with people, but I didn't know truth. And so why should I inflict my ignorance on the world? And I decided I had, in good conscience, I had to give up writing. And I didn't know what to do with my life to support myself, but I remember I went out. I was in Charleston, South Carolina, and I was rooming with 4 other young men. And I went out into the dark one night and asked myself this question. I had never really thought, I thought all the time about God, but I didn't have any idea what God was. And this time I thought, what is God? Well, he can't be a policeman up there waiting for us to make a mistake so he can clap us into prison for eternity. That just didn't make sense. And I thought, well, how can I ask this question? Because I'm conscious. Then he must be consciousness. And the closer I am to him, the more conscious I will be. And the more I cloud my own mind, the less conscious and the less aware I will be of him. And if this is true, then I can imagine becoming more and more conscious and more aware of everything. And the very goal of life has to be to find God. And I remember coming back, I was so thrilled with these deep thoughts that had never entered my mind before. And I remember my 4 roommates were in the kitchen there, and they were all laughing at me for being so serious about it all. And I just thought they're like a bunch of yapping puppies. And I began to really think seriously of giving my life to God. But you know, I didn't know anything. I had never read these. I had never read Indian teachings. I had never read about religion. I had never read even about saints. I thought that a saint was somebody who sort of benignly patted little children on the head and helped old ladies across the street. I didn't know what a saint was. And I thought maybe I'm going crazy. Nobody's ever thought of seeking God. I knew nothing about all that literature. And I went out thinking maybe what I need is a good, healthy country life. But that didn't work. And I found a book in my mother's library, a Short World Bible. And as soon as I read the short teachings about Hinduism, it just completely awakened me. It said that you have to know God, you have to experience Him. It's not enough to believe in Him. Well, this made complete sense. It jibed, you might say, with my scientific training. And then it said that if you want to know Him, you must go to a solitary place and meditate on me. I thought, that's for me. And I decided I'd become a hermit. Well, I thank God I didn't become one, because I didn't know what to do. I mean, what do? You sit there? I didn't know anything. But I'll tell you an amazing thing. It must have been good karma on my part. Because as little as I knew, which was just about nothing, a week before I met Master, I had never heard the word guru, never heard the word karma, or dharma, or all these words that are so commonplace nowadays. This was 1948, and I was very far from being even on the fringe of such teachings. And I put my mother on the ship to go join my father in Cairo, where he'd been sent to explore for oil. And that same day that I put my mother on the ship, I went uptown New York. I found Autobiography of a Yogi. It just was there. And it absolutely changed my life. I gave up everything. I remember I had, as soon as I read that he was vegetarian, all right, then I would be a vegetarian. You know, it was not, I was very logical in my thinking, too intellectual in fact. But I found that on page 8, Lahiri Mahashaya is materializing in a wheat field. And that was far beyond my experience. I had to put all this stuff on a shelf. I couldn't disbelieve it and I couldn't believe it. But what absolutely won me was himself, his own vibrations of love and joy and humility and kindness and compassion. I just knew that's what I had to do. I took the next bus, believe it or not, at the age of 22, the next bus across the country from New York to Los Angeles. And the first words I said to Master were, I want to be your disciple. And he accepted me that day as a monk. And my life since then has been dedicated to spreading his teachings. And I'm so grateful for everything that has happened. Some of the film crew came up to Ananda recently. They're doing a movie about the legacy of Paramhansa Yogananda. And they asked me, do you regret anything? I said, nothing. Even the difficult experiences have been a great blessing because they've taught me. Every one of us goes through hard experiences in life, but if you give those experiences to God, you will find that He will bless you. This whole world is a dream. But when you dream right, you know that story, Groundhog Day, that movie? Well, you won't have to keep coming back again and again. You just suddenly realize that, oh, I understand. And then he doesn't give you those tests anymore. And it's an absolutely wonderful life because, it's the only thing in the world that gets you anywhere. This universe, the way God created this universe was He was without any vibration. He was just the infinite spirit. When He decided to create, He began to move on the surface of that ocean of spirit. And those vibrations created the manifestation of the whole universe. Wherever you have vibration, you have plus and minus. You have up and down. You can't get away from that fact. And so wherever you have the joy, the experience of joy in this world, you're going to have to experience pain in this world. Wherever you have success, you're going to have failure. Everything in life has its opposite. And in fact, the more you purify your heart of these things, the more quickly those things pay for themselves. I remember years ago, somebody gave me a motorhome. And I had been having this desire to be in a motorhome which I could travel the country and share master teachings with everybody and yet have my own environment. And so this fulfilled a desire. And I remember sitting back and laughing my head off. I was so thrilled. And I said, I know I'll have to pay for this, but it's worth it. And that same evening, we were parked in the Safeway parking lot, and Vidura had to go back and get something from the refrigerator. And I was on one foot and one knee on the bench, reaching for something in the cupboard up above. And we didn't know it, but he had left it in gear. And the motorhome was slowly moving, so slowly you couldn't tell. And when finally it hit the Safeway wall, and it threw me onto the floor and broke a finger. And instead of weeping over the finger, I just laughed and laughed. I knew it was the recompense for having had such fun in the beginning. But remember, this is a simple truth of life, that the more you enjoy outwardly, the more you're going to have to pay for it. The sum total of all your millions and millions of incarnations has to be, it can't be anything but zero. And isn't it something to live all those lives and all for nothing? I mean, literally for nothing. The only thing that gets you anywhere is when you try to pull out of this. And when those waves of movement begin to get more closer and closer till finally you're centered in yourself, then you find what you're looking for. And you feel a bliss that is overwhelming. And that's the why of it all. That's why we're here. But do you mind if I sit down? Because I'm a little old and I don't want to fall down. And so, when I met Master, I just absolutely knew this was my path. I've never doubted that it was my path. I had the good fortune or good karma or whatever it may be, not to have to go to anybody else because I didn't know anybody else existed. And when I met him, I knew that was for me. And I can tell you that living with him was the most fantastic experience anybody could possibly have. That you could meet somebody so human and yet redefine what it means to be human. People say, oh, I'm only human, making that their excuse for being weak. No, my answer to that is you're not yet human. Like a woman in Kashmir who used to go around without any clothing. She was a spiritual devotee. And somebody scandalized villagers said, why don't you at least wear something? She said, why should I? I don't see any men around. To her way of thinking, they don't even deserve to be called human beings until they have realized their own purpose. Then one day a saint came to her, and as soon as she heard he was coming, she rushed around looking for clothing to put on. But we have to try to fulfill our potential as human beings. And until we do that, we're not yet human. We're on the road. At least we're not animals. But we're animals in a way too. You have to understand that you are a child of God and that you were made for His bliss. You were made to know Him. as it says, I think, was it St. Augustine or who said, "Thou hast made us for thyself, and our hearts are restless until they find rest in thee." And everybody, and this is a wonderful thing that Yogananda brought this message to the West. It's in the book that I've written in his name, that God is for everyone. And in that book, he says that everybody in the world is trying to avoid pain and to find happiness. And the worst mafioso, the worst murder, the worst everything, everybody is trying to avoid pain and find happiness. This is the reason we should love everybody, because everybody wants that bliss. God is Satchidananda, ever existing, ever conscious, ever new bliss. And as I was coming across the country to meet him, there were two desires that I had in my heart. One was to know God myself, and the other was that this is such a wonderful truth. It's what everybody is seeking. I would like everybody in the world to know about it. And I was thinking, how can I get this message out to everybody? And he saw that in me and made me teach. And I knew that was my destiny, but at the same time I was afraid of people looking at me as something special, which I'm certainly not. But I've never thought of myself as teaching people, but I love to share what little I have learned, because it's so meaningful to everybody if they only would know it. I remember the first time I had to speak in public. I had met him in December, and this was May, 8 months later. And I knew that he was supposed to be speaking in San Diego Church for the first time in 2 months, because it was my job at that time to send out the announcements to the newspapers when he would be there. And people were all told, look in the papers, when it says that he'll be there, that's when he'll be there. Saturday morning, somebody came to my room and said that Master wants you to go to San Diego and speak in his place. I was 22 years old. I'd never spoken before in public. And I thought, oh, those poor people. In those days, we used to have a curtain, and the minister would stand there, and then when the curtain would part, that's when they'd first see him. And they expected to see when the curtain parted. They expected to see Master standing there. Instead, there was this little 22-year-old, and the place was absolutely packed. There were people craning their heads to look in the window, people sitting in the aisle, standing around. I wasn't nervous, thank God. I was just feeling those poor people. All I can say is that they must have done good meditation, because nobody walked out. But this was Master's baptism for me. He had, for me, the job to go out and spread his message. And this was what got me in difficulty with my superiors, but it didn't matter, because he had wanted me to do these things. And I have never, as I said, taught anybody, but I have shared what I know, and I'm happy to do that. So, in these years, I have been able to write a few books and to write a little music and take a few photographs and start a few communities, but I have never tried to. This is where David was wrong. He said, I haven't tried to express myself at all. I've tried to express the truth. And I have found that when I ask him to help me, he's there. When I want a melody that will say something, I think that I'd like a melody that says this, 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 this. Okay, give me a melody. And it's there. I don't have to create the melody. I don't have to think, do I want it to go this way or that way. In Sacramento the night before last, I had rather fun, because I remember, mind you, you think of inspiration and it has to be something great and holy and so on. No, it can be fun too. God can give you anything you want. And I had a slideshow that I had put together about Romania. And as you know, Romania is where they think of the Dracula, a vampire. The truth is that Dracula in Romanian means devil. And there was a king there who was called Vlad Dracula, just as we have in France Louis the Fat, or William the Conqueror, or various names that people have given. Dracula in Romanian, if you want to say go to the devil, they say Safir al-Dracula. But it doesn't mean a vampire or something. Anyway, I wanted to bring it in because so many people expect that of Romania. It has nothing to do with anything that I ever knew when I grew up there. But I put my hand on the keyboard, this hand, and said, well, God, give me a melody. And suddenly, bum, 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 bum. And it was just perfect. And one time I wrote, I did a slideshow called Different Worlds, in which I show people of different nationality, different nations, show how the state of consciousness is there, no matter what a person's skin, what matter a person's upbringing, no matter what a person's language, what a person's culture. Certain things bring happiness and certain things don't. And I show at the end people from Ananda being very serviceful, and shows how peaceful and happy all of them are. And it's a good slideshow, and I do recommend that you see it. But I wanted to write one piece of music that expresses the whole human condition. And I thought that's impossible. The grief, the joy, the pain, the suffering, everything that man experiences, how can you say that in one song? So I had given up on that. But one day I was just thinking, well, maybe God can give me even that kind of melody. So I put my fingers on the keys and I asked God, give me a melody. And suddenly this melody came, and you know it in one of the recordings that we have. La 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 la, la 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 la, la 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 la, la 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 la, la 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 la, la 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 la, la 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 la, la 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 la, la 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 la, la 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 la. La 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 la, la 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 la, la 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 la, la 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 la, la 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 la, la 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 la. And so with variations of that. And somebody was cooking up above in my kitchen, which was a part of my living room at that time. She said, that'll be perfect for that slideshow, Different Worlds. And it was just right for it. And I don't know if it's caught properly, but it really gives that feeling of the human condition. Well, anyway, God has given me everything that I've done. You can't blame me. You'll have to blame God. A good way to get out of it. It reminds me of one time I was at Hollywood Church and I was giving the sermon there, and afterwards a woman said, oh, that was such a great talk. And I said, well, God is the doer. Really? I said, well, I knew it was good. I didn't know it was that good. But that isn't what I meant. I mean that anything that you do, feel that God has done it through you, because in fact He has. He's dreaming this whole thing. And our great job in this world is to get rid of this sense of personal doership. We have to understand that He is dreaming our existence. And the wonderful thing is that He has this very special song to sing through every soul. And what our job is to find what song that is. And the more we get in tune with Him, the more we feel His inspiration. If I think of writing music and trying to inspire people that way, He gives me an inspiration in the form of music. He won't give me it in the form of mathematics. But if I try to write mathematics, then He'll give it to me in that term, not in the term of music. He will inspire you according to what you need. If you're a cook, He will give you good inspiration. I remember one time Master was, he fed us upstairs, just a small group of us, and he said, the meal tasted fantastic. It was full of really divine vibrations. But he said, I don't think, how will it taste? I don't taste the food. I taste it here, and I ask God, does it need more salt? Does it need more this, that? Why not, as a cook that way too? You will find that everything that you do, no matter how mundane, can become a joy if you think of God doing it through you. He does everything through you. He can't get away from it anyway. But if you're conscious of it, then you begin to feel his bliss. And that bliss becomes so wonderful that in everything that you do, you feel it. And it just permeates your whole being. Sometimes I can hardly stand the bliss. It's so intense. But this is what life is all about. Now you must have wondered when I came up here dressed in blue, what on earth is this? Well, I'm trying to create a new renunciate order. The orange order that was done by Swami Shankara back many hundreds of years ago was in the depths of Kali Yuga, the dark age, when man was not able to think in expansive terms, and so it was necessary to think in terms of giving up this, giving up that. Orange is the color of fire. And many times I have said to people that if you will think of yourself as building a fire, going to bed at night, build a bonfire in front of you, then cast into those flames every attachment, every desire. Just say, it's all yours, I don't need any of it. One woman said to me, well, I tried to do that with my house because I wanted to overcome my attachment to it, and the house burned down. And I said, well, thoughts can be powerful, but I didn't tell you to burn your house down. I told you to burn up your attachments to the house. We must get rid of our attachments. We can't change the world, but we can change the way we look at the world. When I was thrown out of SRF, it was a very painful experience to me. But I resolved two things. First of all, the doubt came, was Master himself abandoning me? I said, well, you can do it or not as you choose, but I choose to be loyal and to love you. And they spoke to me with, I have to say, great hate. I said, I choose to love. I would lose twice if I resented their hatred, if I resented their anger. I decided that whatever they did to me, I would feel love. Because for very selfish reason, I'm happy when I love and I'm not happy when I don't love. Isn't that selfish reason good enough to do the right thing in this world? There is a divine selfishness and there is a wrong selfishness. Divine selfishness is to do the right things that will make you happy. And when you think in that way, everything you do for God brings you greater and greater joy. And so Ananda itself is, it means joy. Ananda means divine bliss. And this is what I've been trying to help people to understand for all these years. This is our 40th year of existence as a community. But I was thinking of the old renunciate form in rejecting things and deciding I don't want this. The form that monks had in those days, swamis had in those days, was to get over their attachment to any one place. They're supposed to not stay anywhere more than 3 days. They're supposed to walk the highways from place to place. If they walked the highways today, they'd either be knocked over by a truck or asphyxiated by motor fumes. It wouldn't work. This is a different age. Women couldn't be swamis because how can women wander the highways like men? It just wouldn't be appropriate. It wouldn't be right. But in this age, you find most swamis have some property. They have some possessions. They have some money to carry on. In the old days, it was right and proper and understandable and understood that they would go begging their meal from house to house. If they did it in this country, but even in India today, they'd be sort of looked upon as panhandlers, wouldn't they? It just isn't the society for it. The main thing that people now can do, now that we understand that this universe is a dream of God's, now that we understand that matter is not matter the way it appears to be, that it's really only a vibration of energy. And many scientists have said, Max Planck declared, without consciousness you can't think about anything. Nothing can be except that it be a manifestation of consciousness. More and more scientists are coming to that conclusion. But in this day and age, therefore, it's much easier to understand something that a few hundred years ago it would have been absolutely impossible to teach. And that is, get rid of this ego. Understand that it's he who is vibrating in your body. You're not this bag of flesh and bones. You're the consciousness in that. But each one of you is like the little flame coming from a burner on a stove. And if you were to put a little different chemical powder on each burner, each jet of flame, each jet would have a different color. And so we, with our separate definitions, when you look at a room full of people like this and you see so many different ways that God has managed to, what He's managed to do with 2 eyes, a nose, and a face, and a mouth. It's just amazing. There's so much variety in human beings. And yet, in all of that, each one of you has written onto Him His incarnations, countless incarnations of experience. Every one of those experiences has written itself on your face. And I often will look at a crowd of people like here, and I'll say, I know you. I remember one thing, I was in a TV show in India a year or two ago, and there were about 100 people present. I looked around, they all seemed like old friends or old family members. And I'm sure that you've had such experiences sometimes, that you meet somebody and you feel, well, this is a friend. I know him, I know her. Well, all of us, what we do is carry with us, wherever we go, our own bundle of self-definitions. I'm a man, I'm a woman, I'm a Frenchman, I'm an American, I'm an Indian, I'm rich, I'm poor, I like this, I like that, and so on. All these definitions write themselves on people's faces. Sometimes those faces are not pleasant to look at, but all of us have the God inside us that is ever perfect. Every one of us inside us is an image of that same God, and He manifested Himself through us, then we took it. You know, the very interesting thing Master said in Autobiography of a Yogi, that every atom is dowered with individuality. Every one of us, science talks about, or pseudoscientists, I don't know what, but they talk about someday there will have to be computer rights, as if someday computers will be intelligent enough to be just like you and me. Well, there are 2 things that science will never be able to inculcate into any machine: consciousness and sense of self. Feeling, I should say, conscious feeling and sense of self. You can't create those mechanically. You've been given these things. How do you know that you exist? Descartes had it wrong when he said that I think, therefore I am. If you can go into deep meditation, you go beyond thinking, and you know much better that you are than when you're busy thinking all the time. That is not the proof of your existence. It's the fact that you know that you're thinking. And you have to know that you are before you can begin to think. So the truth of life is that we need to understand who we are. Now in this age, it's possible to teach these things. A few hundred years ago, if you tried to talk, we just wonder, what are you talking about? But now we can see that if matter doesn't exist, if everything material is really a vibration of energy, then this body doesn't really have a final existence. And when you die, in fact, you don't feel pain in that death. It's a wonderful experience. You're released from this body. There is no pain in dying. But leaving your physical body is just getting rid of one sheath. You have to get rid of your astral body too. You have to get rid of your causal body and realize that you are He. And this little being that you are, that likes breakfast in the morning at a certain hour and takes his coffee and goes to work, that's not who you are at all. So I have come to the conclusion that what we need to renounce more than anything else, it's not my conclusion, it's a simple fact. We have to renounce this thought that I am I. He is you. He is dreaming your existence. And if we can reach that point, then we can know Him. Now this is in the Mahabharata, the great epic poem of India, one of 2 great epic poems. In there, Bhishma, called Grandfather Bhishma, is given the grace not to die until he chooses to die. And at the end of the battle of Kurukshetra, he's lying on a bed of arrows that have pierced him. His whole body is riddled with arrows, and yet he's still alive. And he gives a beautiful lecture a sermon on kingship and what the duties of a king are. and then he gives up his own body. And this is an allegory to say that the ego has to finally give up itself. The ego has to say, I merge into you. How do we accomplish that end? It says in the Bible, to all those who received him, to them gave he the power to become the sons of God. And most people think receiving him means, yeah, I believe in him. Well, gosh, people used to believe the world was flat, but that didn't make it flat. Your beliefs don't guarantee anything. You have to experience it. And to receive Christ means more than just receiving at the altar. It means experiencing his presence in yourself. And this is why a guru is so necessary. Before I met Master, I would never have accepted anybody because I never thought that anybody knew anything. I knew I didn't know anything. But when I met him, I knew this man knows, this man has what I want. And I found that it wasn't just his teachings, and some true gurus never speak a word. And you might say, well, how can they be gurus? I read in the Times of India a few years ago where it said that we don't need gurus anymore. Everybody's literate, and most people can go and buy books in bookstores. Who needs a guru? They don't understand that the purpose of the guru is to lift your consciousness. The ego wants to give itself to God, but it can't do it. This is the maddening thing about it. There was a story Master told me, and when I say Master, I mean Paramhansa Yogananda, and he told me that there was this man who was being bothered by a demon. And so he had read in the Shastras and the Scriptures that if you recite this particular mantra and throw it onto the demon, the demon will disappear. So he recited his mantra into this powder and threw it on the demon. The demon laughed at him. He said, before you could even say your mantra, I myself got into the powder. And the meaning of that, as Master explained to me, is that this ego, which is saying I am free, it itself is already infected with this delusion of freedom. One disciple said to Master one day, because Master said all you need to do is really say I'm free and you'll be free. And the disciple said, well, if I said I was free, I wouldn't be free, would I? Master said, yes, you would be, but the trouble is you've already answered your own question. You've said I wouldn't be. And then he told this story to show that unless you can achieve that consciousness of inner freedom, the ego itself is already infected with that disease of delusion. And this is why it's necessary to find a guru. People ask me sometimes, do I need a guru? I said, no, forget about it. You don't need a guru. But if you want God, then yes, you do need a guru. Because you can't get out of this delusion yourself. And a guru can be somebody who is teaching you personally, but it can be also somebody who is no longer in the body. If that person is a representative, for example, Jesus is still the guru of all Christians, but they have to go to somebody who can help them to understand his teaching, who can give the understanding of that teaching by a touch. And so many Christian saints have been gurus in the sense of acting as representatives for Master. In that sense, those who are disciples of Yogananda, you see, let me explain it again a little bit more deeply. When you can overcome the ego, when you can go into Nirvikalpa Samadhi, there are two samadhis. The first one, you go, Savikalpa Samadhi is a conditioned, Sampangata Samadhi it's called. And when you go into that state, it's you might say, the John Smith, nevertheless real, am for the moment infinite. But you have those tendencies still in your subconscious to pull you back to the body. And it is possible because when you come back to the body, you're still in ego consciousness. And so it is that people, and Master told me some examples, and I have some reason to think this happened to me too, that I attained that state, and then I lost it through various problems that people get into. You're not free, he said, until you attain Nirvikalpa Samadhi. Nirvikalpa Samadhi means when you've absolutely destroyed your ego. You know, it's a wonderful thing. If you have a lake that is absolutely frozen, solid, on top, and you try to break through that ice to get to the lake, it would take a huge power to break through the whole lake. But if you're standing at one spot and drill at that one spot, you can get through very easily. If you will drill at that little spot that you are, your own ego, if you can trace your own ego to its source, then you find yourself in that infinite ocean of bliss. And in that ocean you can begin to dissolve all the rest of that ice. So what happens is that Jivan Mukta, one who has attained that state of freed while living, it means, he no longer can fall from that state because he knows God is he. But he still has incarnations of past karma to work out. And he has to do that. Many saints, Master one time said to me that all those saints in the autobiography, the only ones who had attained final liberation were Babaji, Larry Moshe, Yukteswar. He didn't name himself at that time, but he had said it at other times to me. And he said, Pranabananda, the saint with two bodies, and Ram Gopal Moshamdara, the sleepless saint. And I asked him about all those other saints. He said, no, not yet. They've attained Nirvikalpa, they're Jivan Mukta, but they haven't attained final liberation. So you can imagine what a huge thing it is to finally become completely free. And when you've attained that state, most people this is everything they ever wanted. They don't want anything else. It's like a story that Ramakrishna told of 3 men who went out from a village, and they suddenly, unexpectedly, came upon a high wall. They'd never seen that wall before. And they thought, well, I wonder what's on the other side of that wall. And so with a great deal of effort, they managed to get somebody up on somebody else's shoulders, and they bent down enough for the third person to get on his shoulders, and finally the man got to the top of the wall, and he looked down, and gleefully he jumped down, and they waited and waited and waited. And finally he didn't come back, and they said, well, what can this be? And so the other 2 said, well, if we can get one of us up there, he can tell us. So they managed to get the other one. I think the first one stood on a tree stump and up on his shoulder. Finally, the second person was able to get to the top of the wall, and he looked down and he clapped his hands and jumped into the on the other side. And this first man or third man, whichever, waited and waited, and he didn't come back. So finally he thought, I've just got to know what's on the other side of that wall. And so he leaned a tree against the wall, and he climbed up and finally got up there. He saw the most beautiful garden you could ever imagine. His only thought was to jump down into it and enjoy it forever. But then he thought, but if I do, all those poor people in the village who have never heard of this place, they'll never learn about it. So he jumped down and came back to help people. So this is the difference between a saint and an avatar. A saint is one who has attained that state, a complete saint, a perfected saint. But an avatar is one who, having attained that state, comes back to this world with the power of God. And such few people are people like Babaji, Krishna, Jesus Christ, Buddha, other great masters. And our master was in that category too. He said to us, he's come back again and again and again. He said, as long as there's one stray brother weeping by the wayside, I want to come back. And that kind of love is really hard to conceive of even. But when great avatars like that come into the world, they come with a world mission. And those who represent them can act as channels for that inspiration. In that sense, I and Asha and David and Jyotish and Devi and ministers of Ananda and all of you indeed can and should try to be channels for Master to other people. You don't have to say he's doing it all. He can do through you things that you could never do yourself. I couldn't have done the work I've done if I had done it from my own ego. But he's given me that power. And he will give it to you. This thing has to go on. It's like a baton race, a relay race, where you pass the baton from one person to another. When you talk with people, when you're with people, try to be an instrument for that divine power. Now, why the blue? Well, in the Swami order, the traditional color has been orange. Orange, however, although a color of fire, it destroys limitations and attachments and so on. But I think the time for renunciates today is to welcome bliss and not to think of the things you're giving up so much, but make it more positive. And blue, I have to begin that by saying that I have met many swamis in India who seem to me unconscionably arrogant. And there is not the emphasis in that color or in that fact of emphasizing in themselves the need for humility, the need for him to be only an instrument of God. And I was thinking of the different colors. Red is a color of cheerfulness, if you want to have it positive, but there's also muddy red is anger, lust, and so on. Didn't seem an appropriate color. Orange seemed to me too aggressive, too authoritarian. I think that a teacher should share. He shouldn't be an authority on things. We all have that truth. You can't teach people truth. You can help them to recognize it in themselves. Yellow is the color of monks in Thailand, and it's a beautiful color, but it lacks heart. And I wanted something that would have more heart in it too. And so green is a color of health, but not... I was thinking of indigo at one time, but in India, they tend to think of indigo as the color for Shudras, the lowest caste. So that didn't work. But I have to say that wearing orange for all these years, I've often wished it could be blue. And now I have the justification for making it blue. Because blue is expensive. Blue is, it's like the sky, and it can be very full of love and clarity and so on. So I would like in this new Swami order to make it possible. I know somebody came to me, and this is what made me start thinking about this order. He has pestered me for years trying to make him a Swami. I've said to him, look, I wouldn't mind making you a Swami, but I don't think you're ready for it. And more than that, it would give you a leg up which you shouldn't have. You're not a leader of anything here. And then I thought, well, a position of Swami shouldn't have anything to do with position in an organization. It should have only to do with your own sincerity. And so I decided that I needed to have an order that, you know, in the early years of Ananda, we had many monks and nuns. Forgive me if I'm being too facetious and too absurd, but one time, I can't help having fun, so forgive me. One time the nuns at Mount Washington wanted to have a different word from nun. They didn't like the word nun. So I suggested, but quietly to a friend, I didn't say it out public, what about renunciate? Or maybe monkini. But in my more sophisticated thinking of this thing, I have seen that the people who are the most dedicated at Ananda are virtually all of them married. And they're much more so than most renunciates that I have seen, because they've renounced the only thing that really counts. They're not thinking of themselves. They're not thinking of what they can get from other people. They're thinking of what they can give. And Lahiri Mahashaya was born to bring this teaching of Kriya Yoga to householders and not only to renunciates and sannyasis. And so I felt that what we need is a monastic order that makes it possible for women too to become swamis, and householders too to become swamis. We can call them Naya Swamy, new kind of Swami. But I'm writing this out in a booklet, and I've gotten to page 56, and you're going to have to wait. But I want you to know that that is the direction that I see for our future, where those who sincerely live for God, not young people who can still have children, because when you have children, you're pretty well bound to follow their karma too. But when you've reached a certain age, that whether you're married or single, if you really feel that you want to dedicate your life completely to God, whatever it is you are doing, wherever it is you are living, then you too can be this new kind of renunciate. And I'm offering that to you tonight, a little in anticipation of that thing which I plan to develop. Asha helped to develop this robe. And let me stand up for a moment so you can see and admire it. I would like to see this spread beyond the shores of Ananda to the whole world, because I think that the time has come for a new, complete dedication to God. We're living in a time, first of all, as you know, those of you who have been associated with our teachings, and I hope that there are some people who know nothing about our teachings, who are completely new here. But our teaching is that there are ages of man, and that we have passed from an age of darkness, Kali Yuga. In India, they think we're still in it. But according to my Param Guru, Swami Kriyananda, we have come out of Kali Yuga, and we are now in the beginnings of Dwapara, which is an age of energy. And that mankind goes through cyclic changes according to the position of our solar system in the galaxy. And that's much too complex a subject for me to go into here. But we are at the beginning of a completely new age, and the ways of the old age are going to be destroyed. I think in the lives of many of you, but I hope not in mine, we will have found that we've entered a new age of a wonderful age. But I believe also that we're coming to a time of great hardship, because there's a great battle between the side that wants to think in terms of more fluid ideas, less dogmatic ideas about everything, see things more in terms of energy and flow, and the old ways of fixed forms and fixed things and solid matter and so on. This way of understanding is going by the board, and there's coming a struggle there. This is the understanding beneath everything of what is happening today. What do I see for our immediate future? Well, I don't see that the way to that will be an easy thing, because you find that most people don't want to change that quickly. They change only when they're forced to. We change spiritually only when we have to go through tests. Those tests are necessary for us, and if you will welcome them instead of resisting them and say, God, why are you treating me like this? Then it will be much easier. But most people do kick and scream all the way to the altar. And so we have to understand that the time ahead of us is not going to be easy. I believe, quite seriously, that we're coming into a very great depression. I would urge you, very seriously, think in terms of either joining Ananda, which I've done partly for this reason, or building something yourselves. But go out to the country and buy land on which you and a few friends of yours can grow your own food, can live simply. You're not going to have what you have right now. People already are starting to lose their jobs, but it will be much, much worse than that, in my view. Master said that the depression that is coming will be much worse than the depression of the 1930s. It's been brought on by human avarice, by human greed. But what does this lead to? It leads to warfare. Global war is an almost inevitable thing. There isn't the peace that you'd expect of this planet if it was to go on being peaceful. Karthikeyan, who used to be the equivalent of Edgar J. Hoover in this country, in India, he had that position. He told me that there are some 30,000 nuclear weapons, known nuclear weapons in the world. If one person drops a nuclear bomb, do you suppose nobody else will? I see great suffering in the future, and I think it's going to be very soon. I think that we're going to have lots of troubles. Nobody will be hurt if he thinks of God. Remember, death itself it's not painful. But if you live for God and give your lives to God, He will protect you in amazing ways. But also, why not be practical? This idea of communal living, I think cities are a disease. I think that the future is going to be a world without big cities. I think towns of maybe 30,000 people or something, that'll be okay. Well, how can you have that in a world with 6 billion people? Maybe there won't be 6 billion people then. Maybe there'll be 1 billion, maybe there'll be a few 100 million, I don't know. But I do think that great changes are coming, and the world that you know today won't be there. And I think that it would be a wonderful thing if you could just get together and buy some land and go out on weekends and help to develop it. Learn your own. We're developing permaculture and other kinds of growing food at Ananda Village that is very advanced, and I strongly recommend that you learn how we do it. Or, as I said, join Ananda. What are you going to do here in Palo Alto? Well, if you can get land on the ridge, if you can get land out of the city. I said to a nephew of mine, what will happen when the trucks try to get into the inner cities or to places like Palo Alto, and they're stopped by people who want that food? Trucks bringing food. What will happen? My nephew said that's already happening. In Detroit, they brought a truck with food into the inner city, and 2 people had to ride shotgun on each side to help them to get through. This is not unlikely. I would say it was too likely to be thinking and smiling about. Do take it seriously. Work in pooling your resources to get land outside the city. Be ready to go there when you can. Or up here on the ridge, which is not far away, but the land is so expensive, that's the trouble. Anyway, that's your problem. But I think that even, I know Padre Pio, who was a great saint in Italy, and he said that there will come a time, and he thought it would come from outside our solar system or our planet. But you have to realize we're living in a cosmic environment. And what we attract here is our karma. But it's happened before, and it's likely to happen again. Some heavenly body coming into this world and wreaking havoc. He said at such a time, don't go out of doors. Don't let anybody in the house. Don't go out of the house. Keep your windows closed. For 3 days, he said, there will be days of darkness. I don't know. Will it mean that on the other side of the world there will be days of light, sunshine? I think 3 days of sunlight in India would be just about as devastating as 3 days of darkness here. But all of this to say that God does have His times of operating on the human race, and this is one of them. So do take those words seriously. But remember that the whole purpose of life, and those who live for God understand it, the whole purpose of life is finally to understand that this world is not your home. It isn't where you belong. You try to build yourself your little nest, and then along comes the cat and knocks the nest down. And everything that you own, everything that you put your faith in, everything you're clinging to, it could be taken away. That's why I say every night, build a bonfire in your mind and just toss into that bonfire all your attachments. Say, I want only you. You know, of all the different paths that people follow in this world, and people say, well, okay, you seek God, that's your thing. My thing is going out and becoming a millionaire. But ask yourself this question. In every field, do you find that those who have attained are satisfied? Never. The only field in which those who have reached the goal they were looking for is the spiritual. Those who have found God, those who have felt His presence in themselves, those who know His bliss, nothing can touch them. They're willing even to give up their lives for other people because their bodies mean nothing to them. But they're the only people who have done something that works. And every other path leads to disappointment, leads to failure, leads to nothing. The sum total, as I said, of everything is nothing. Zero. I met a monk in India whose name was Shunya Bhai, Brother Zero. Good name. You are nothing. And it's a wonderful feeling to think that. Most people think, well, I want to be somebody. But that little somebody is such a tiny little ant on this crawling, on this rotating globe. When you are nothing, you find that you are everybody. You find that everybody is your friend. And everywhere you go, you look at people and you feel that these are my friends. And you find that strangers even will come up to you and want to talk to you or help you. I remember one time in Paris, many years ago, I wanted to go to a concert there. and I was to fly out for America the next day. And there was this concert in a church there. It was my birthday, and I wanted to celebrate. So I went to this place, and they were closing the doors, saying that nobody more can be admitted. And I said in French, "But it's my birthday." And they said, "Oh, then come in." And so, happy birthday. So they let me in. But the congregation, the seats were all filled, so they could only put me up behind the altar of this church. And the music was so blissful, I just was overwhelmed with it. And later on, I was in the metro, in the subway in Paris, and an old woman came to me and she said, "Do you remember me?" And I said, "No." "But I was in the congregation listening to the music tonight." Well, how? There were 700 people there. How could I remember her? The beautiful thing was that she had developed that sense of closeness to me, because in seeing my bliss, she recognized something of herself too. And she sat down and she told me about problems she was having with her daughter and wanting help and so on, just as if I was an old friend. But you will find that wherever you go, if you feel that that one presence of God is in everybody, they will all be your friend. They'll be happy to help you. There's a beautiful story of Ramatirtha, who was a Swami in India at the beginning of the 20th century. And somehow he felt the inspiration to come to America. And he was on the boat, and this American, as they were approaching the harbor of San Francisco, this American came to him and he said, "But do you have any money?" "No," cheerfully he said. "Do you have any friends in this country?" "I have one." "Oh, who is it?" "You." And the man was so touched by this statement that he took charge of him and helped him to make a lecture tour of America and so on. The man had come without any money, without anything, but he just trusted in God. And an interesting thing that he said was that someday you Americans will take this yoga science and make it practical and bring it back to my people. And Master said that in the future, America and India will unite hands, not unite politically, but unite hands to guide the world on the path of material and spiritual efficiency. He spoke of the future quite a few times. He said that Europe will be devastated, Russia will be annihilated. He spoke very strongly about the future. But India and America, he said, American karma is basically very good. We have, it's true, done a few things that we should not have, but basically, what other country in history has been attacked and after beating that enemy has stooped to lift them up? Only America. People say, well, you did it for a reason. Yeah, of course, there's selfishness and there's divine selfishness. This is divine selfishness and it's brought us much good karma. But when we live for God, and this country was founded on that desire, it's going more and more to the devil, you might say, more and more to the side of matter and materialism. It'll have to suffer, as the whole world will. But don't be afraid. Just try to keep your feet on the ground. Keep your mind on what can you do in a practical way to live more for God. This teaching that Master has come to bring, I have just finished editing a book of Catherine, who has written about William the Conqueror. Yogananda said that he was William the Conqueror. I grew up in the English system, and I had always been raised to think that of William the Conqueror as one of the great villains of history. And here I found he was my own guru. I had to do some hasty rethinking here. But I studied his life, and I studied the life of his successors and so on. But he was a very great soul, and he came to bring a whole new age. It says in the Bhagavad Gita, whenever virtue declines and evil becomes transcendent, I incarnate in this world as an avatar, as an incarnation of God, to bring virtue to its rightful place and punish evil. Not punish evildoers, punish evil, to destroy evil. And this was the role of William the Conqueror. And there was an article in Newsweek, I think in the January issue of 2000, I'm not sure, and some historian, I think it's A.E. Freeman, who wrote that it's from William the Conqueror that it's to him personally that we owe our modern world. It's an extraordinary statement, but he did have a tremendous impact. That is the impact that Yogananda has come to bring to this world, not just another little movement. He's come to show, and I've tried in my books to show how his teaching can affect every path of life. And I've written books on spiritualizing education, marriage, business, everything, to help people to understand how this teaching brings a whole new dimension to society. This is a great mission. And I have written these books not to be like a German philosopher who tries to nail down every tiny board. I've tried to be seminal. But I would love for all of you to think, well, I can bring this thing into the future. I can write books on this. I can teach things like this. I can help the children in the schools to do it. And so many different things we can do to advance this teaching. I say that if you're in this teaching, you're onto a good thing. Don't think that it's just coming to church on Sunday and doing your own little meditation. You have something important to give to the world. Be a channel for that. Well, I've talked for a while, and it's always a joy to come here and be with you all. I remember when you weren't here, you didn't have this church, and I would drive up Camino Real, and I'd see this church. It was a Catholic church then, and I said, we ought to have that church. So finally we have it, and for me it's a great bliss. Let me sing for you now the poem that Master wrote, God, God, God. And I wrote it to music one time. I woke up one morning and that melody was in my mind. So can you play that? Yeah. Okay. Are you there? Hmm? Has he got it? Yes. Is it tuned? If it's too high, I'll just sing without it, but we'll try. That's a little low. That's a little too low. I'll sing without it. From the depths of slumber as I ascend the spiral stairways of wakefulness, I will whisper, whisper, God, God, God. Thou art the food, and when I break my fast of nightly separation from Thee, I will taste Thee and mentally say, God, God, God. No matter where I go, the spotlight of my mind will ever keep turning on Thee, and in the battle din of activity, my silent war cry will be, God, God, God. When boisterous storms of trial shriek, and when worries howl at me, I will drown their noises loudly chanting, God, God, God. When my mind weaves dreams, dreams, with threads of memories, on that magic cloth will I emboss, God, God, God. Every night in time of deepest sleep, when my peace dreams and calls, joy, joy, my joy comes singing evermore. God, God, God. In waking, eating, working, dreaming, sleeping, serving, meditating, chanting, divinely loving, my soul will constantly hum, unheard by any. God, God, God. God bless you all. It's been my joy to be with you. Thank you for being here.